Steve, I'm having a hard time making a decision right now.
Yeah.
I think that I'm not sure if I have free will or not.
Mhm.
Let's talk about it.
Okay.
Let's talk about free will. So let me start by saying that we interviewed a neurologist and a researcher and a philosopher named Robert Sapolsky.
Mhm.
And he came onto the podcast and he was talking to us. And his opinion is that humans don't have free will. And, you know, I was sitting there and I'm listening to the two of you talk because it's mostly, you know, of course, you had the most to say. I just had a few questions for him. But the first thing I want to do with you is I would like you and I to have a common definition of what free will is.
Yeah.
So then we could talk about it a little easier.
I think that's the hard part.
Is defining
it. So, and there are, and I actually wrote about it recently on Neurological blog, and I said you really have to break it down into different things. You know, I think the term free will is so vague in a lot of ways. So, and I think what like Sapolsky was talking about, and the philosophers who basically argue that we do not have free will are talking about is that everything that we do is a product of our brain function, right? Our brain is a machine. It's an organ. It's a biological machine. And it follows the laws of physics. So isn't that deterministic, right? Isn't the whatever algorithm is running in your brain is going to run in your brain and result in whatever the outcome is. So it's not free. It's constrained by the laws of physics.
Of course it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course it is. And so from that point of view, we do not have free will. And some people, though, call that a causal free will, right? We do not have, and that's pretty clear. We do not have a causal free will. We cannot step outside of the laws of physics and make a decision based on something other than the interaction of molecules.
It's not even worth talking about as far as I'm concerned, because
it's a done deal.
It doesn't
right.
mean anything.
Yeah. So the only way to sort of rescue that, I think, is with spiritual dualistic kind of assumptions, like that we're not just matter, that there's something, you know, our mental function is, you know, magical, spiritual, whatever, you know, separate from just physical matter. So therefore, we can make decisions, but I reject that, right?
I do too.
Supernatural.
Yeah. We're not going to answer any questions here by saying magic is in play.
Right. So yeah, it's the supernatural, I think, answer is not viable. So if you are a naturalist, right, you believe in naturalism and you think that, you know, every effect has a cause, we do not have a causal free will. Okay, but then you could look at it from a neurological perspective, which is actually what I find most interesting. Surprise, surprise. And so you get, from a neurological point of view, forget about the physics, you know, the fact that our brains are machines, but just talk about just the process by which we make decisions. Because, you know, if at the other end of the spectrum, if you define free will as the ability to make free decisions, then we do have free will, right? The neurological question, I think, is stuck in between those two extremes. You know, the physics causality and the fact that we are able to make decisions. The neurological approach says that we have semi-free will, which means that, yeah, you make decisions, but those decisions are profoundly influenced by things outside of your control.
Which is basically who you are.
It's a lot of things, right? Yeah. So you could look at it as, you know, there's an algorithm running in your head, right? There's multiple algorithms, you know, and all running at the same time. But they're also interacting with the environment, with everything that's happening, right? And that our brain basically is the organ that evolved to interact with the outside world, with the environment, to you know, to make decisions, to adapt to what's happening immediately, right? Like you can't evolve a behavior to deal with something that's in the moment. You need something that can see what's happening, make decisions, etc. But so much is happening at a subconscious level. Are your decisions really free? And this is, I think, where the real debate is to what extent are your decisions conscious, free choices? And to what extent is that an illusion?
Okay.
Are we just rationalizing decisions that are made subconsciously where we're not aware of all the influences that are happening?
I have a thing for you to talk about to help explain this and to maybe get to a better definition or answer here. All right. So for example, and this is real. Like I have been for like the last 6 months, I've been like, I just have not had the emotional bandwidth to work out consistently.
Yeah.
And I told myself, I'm like, I really got to get on top of this. It's really important. And I really want to do it. And I do really want to do it. And I'm having a hard time making myself do it. Now, is that an expression of me not having free will because I can't make myself do this?
Yeah. Yes.
So would you say then, all right, good. I mean, that's what I was hoping.
From a neurological point of view, yes.
Okay. So if I can make myself do it, especially when I don't want to, really don't want to, in a way, I want to be lazy, right? Because humans, I think a lot of us like want to sit back and be in comfort and not put ourselves in.
Yeah.
If I'm making myself do things that I know are good for me that I really don't want to do, can't we argue that that is really expressing free will?
No.
Okay.
Because why do you want to do it? Because another part of your brain is telling you that you want to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's just different parts of your brain arguing with itself.
Well, do you know what different parts are arguing?
It depends on what, so to some extent, like for example, you have what we call executive function, which if we have free will, that's what it is, right? Neurologically speaking, that's the closest we can get to it. But executive function will do things like, this is in my long-term best interest, self-interest, right? If I work out, I know I will live longer. I'll be
healthier.
I'll be healthier. I'll be more functional. I'll be able to walk into an older age. I'll be whatever. There's a lot of benefits, and I want those benefits. So I want to engage in the behavior that will yield me those benefits. So I'm going to do it, but I'm tired, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I also want to play this video game,
right?
And I also want to watch a TV show. And so, which one of those things wins out? Are you really like consciously in control of which one wins out? Or is it really just the algorithm plays itself out, there's the scale, and then whichever one wins, wins. And you call that your decision, and you rationalize it as your decision, but was it really your decision? Or was it just the algorithm playing itself out?
Understood.
Right?
And I guess we're asking more opinion here, right? Because there isn't any like quote unquote fact about this. Do you think that metacognition or practicing metacognition could make you have more free will?
Yeah, because you're changing the algorithm, right? You're changing the game a little bit. So, like for example, if you exercise your executive function, it will get relatively stronger, and therefore it shifts the balance, in the favor of your executive function. Or if you have internalized certain moral or ethical things, like if you think if I don't work hard, I'm not a good person, right? That got inculcated into you as a child or growing up or whatever. That becomes part of the algorithm, is like your self-perception, because we're always doing 100 things at once, right? We always want 100 things at the same time, and it's why a lot of neuroscientists characterize the brain as like a committee. Like there's 100 voices all screaming at the same time. Which one wins out? Well, it kind of depends. It depends on a lot of variables.
Yeah, sure it does.
There's a lot of internal variables, and there's a lot of external variables.
But do you think though that using metacognition and analyzing our thinking, and
it's all good,
right? So in a way, like you're agreeing that would be like leaning more towards having more control and being more in the driver's seat.
But what's in control and what's in the driver's seat? Again, it's just different circuits in your brain.
Okay,
it's all a balance of the different circuits in your brain. Because there is no you outside of the circuits in your brain.
Understood. I know, but there are parts of me that want one thing, and there are parts of me that want another thing, and some win here and some lose here, right? Okay. Right. But if I take it from the idea of, I'm sitting here saying to you right now, I have defined what kind of person I want to be. I do have that definition. I know who I want to be, who I try to be, right? I'm constantly like reminding myself to, do a better job of the things that I'm doing, to be more mindful, to take care of myself physically, right? If I determine, and I think my whole brain agrees, that's good. That's where we want to be, right? And if I'm not meeting those needs, and then I use metacognition to get myself to do those things.
But are you? Is that how successful is that?
I think it works a lot. I think if I spend the time to think about stuff and really intellectually think about it,
it gives you a bit more. It moves the needle a little bit in the direction that you want to go. But here's the thing: if you look at all the research, that doesn't work.
It doesn't work,
right? And here's why: because what you're defining is an extremely high energy state.
It is,
yeah. And it's just that's one of the things also that gets factored in is that it's not only like which internal network within your brain is winning the argument, right? Is having a greater influence. If you have a really high energy one competing against really low energy ones, the low energy ones are going to win out in the long run.
Really?
Right? So let's take dieting, for example. 95% of people fail. 95%.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? And of course, there's been decades of research and all kinds of study from every angle about it. And the other thing, and the same thing is true, like people who want to quit smoking or stop doing drugs or exercise regularly or clean their house or whatever it is. These are all high energy states. If you look at what the literature shows is the key to success, it's not leveraging your willpower, right? That's a recipe for failure.
It's getting in the habit.
It's leveraging all of the low energy things. It's like if you want to work out regularly, you have a buddy system where you have a social pressure of somebody else that works out with you.
Oh, and that is considered that's a lower energy.
Well, it's just that you're basically leveraging social pressure.
Okay.
Right? Which is a more passive thing rather than I just need to constantly be marshaling all of my high energy, frontal lobe executive function.
That's brilliant.
Well, this is old news.
But still,
this is the research shows, that what you want to do, like when you don't have fatty food in the house, right? If you want to lose weight,
don't buy that.
Don't tempt me, Frodo. Like you don't want the temptation right in front of you all the time because you will cave. Eventually, you'll cave to the temptation.
Would you take the ring, Steve? Would you take the ring?
Would I take the
Frodo?
one ring? We don't know because we haven't been actually influenced by the ring, right? We haven't resisted.
Well, that's true. I mean, I guess it's hard.
We would say we would like to imagine that we wouldn't, but when you're in that position, you're under the influence.
The ring is
then you don't know. So this is like the legal system wrestles with this as well, right? Because there's the reasonable person standard, right? It's not just did that person do the right thing. It's also would your average, typical, reasonable person have done that in that situation, right? So can people get pushed beyond the limits? Like if somebody irritates you and you punch them, you assaulted them. But is there a limit? Like, could you say, well, most people would have done what you did because you were pushed beyond normal human limits of whatever, of tolerance or endurance, or this is like the Twinkie defense. We hear all these things all the time where it's like there was undue external influence that even a reasonable person would have caved under those, like because of fear.
I'm glad that the legal system does that because,
But that's explicitly acknowledging that our choices are not free.
That
they are influenced by our environment.
Of course, though.
And then, of course, you can say, but they came from a bad background. Then they're influenced by our background, by our history. And then when you talk about it from a psychological angle, like we know psychologists, like Richard Wiseman, for example, and he's like, it's amazing the degree to which you can influence what people do with apparently trivial factors. You know what I mean? Like people are remarkably influenceable, in terms of their behavior. It's not 100% though, but why is that? Is that because they weren't influenced or because there's just so many chaotic influences you can't totally predict the outcome? And sometimes those influences are not apparent. So for example, the marshmallow test, we talk about that, right? So you're trying to design a psychological study, which is what are psychological studies? They're studying the ways in which our choices are not free, right? In a way. They're saying, how do we influence people's behavior and decision making with these external factors? And what they did was they give a marshmallow to a young child, 5 years old, and they say, you can eat that marshmallow now, or I'll be back in 2 minutes. And if you haven't eaten that marshmallow, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And so it was designed as a test of executive function. Can the child, stave off eating the marshmallow for the 2 minutes to get a second marshmallow? That would be the rational thing to do, right? Some kids can do it and some kids can't. And the interpretation was, well, the kids that can't do it, they eat the marshmallow, they don't have the executive function. Their executive function is relatively, less powerful, and so the desire to eat the marshmallow wins out. And that may be true, but after 50 years of that research paradigm being done countless times, another experiment was done where they controlled for the child's security, in their home. And what they found was that if the child didn't have a secure home environment, they were much more likely to fail the marshmallow test.
Wow.
So they didn't wait for the second marshmallow, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't believe the adult was coming back with a second
Just
marshmallow.
confounding factor
They had
there.
no reason to trust
An adult.
the adults
Yeah.
because the adults in their life were not trustworthy.
That's very sad. Oh
It's
my
very
God.
sad because you were made an internal interpretation when there was really an external interpretation, and obviously because of what
And how
that
do you
says about-
factor for all those
how do you
externals?
factor for
Yeah.
all those things? It's chaos. Is
Yeah.
that free will, or does that just create the illusion of free will? Right. So neurologically, the thing is, you can use metacognition to get outside of all these things to some extent, and it really is, I think, just you're trying to leverage a high energy frontal lobe, executive function, what we call the neocortex, the most evolved, cortex.
Mhm.
You're trying to leverage that as much as possible by thinking about your thinking, in order to have the decision be more rational rather than, because the thing is, if you're not aware, if you're not thinking about your own thinking, then you're likely to just do the thing that your limbic system wants you to do, right? Your
Yeah.
lizard brain wants you to do, and then you just rationalize it, And so
we're good at rationalizing.
We're really good at that.
Yeah.
We're really good at that because that's a low energy state. So the fact that you can model human behavior almost as like you're going to take the pathway of least resistance, right? And how do you influence behavior? You make some pathways lower resistance. Like that is so dominantly true of human behavior. What does that say? I mean, it kind of all argues that we only have at best semi-free will.
Yeah.
Even if you discount the physics of it, forget about the causality. If you're just talking about how we function neurologically.
So my take from what I'm hearing you say is correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to touch very strongly on critical thinking.
Yeah.
If you have metacognition or practice metacognition, if you have examined your intellectual thinking and really live an examined life, which I think critical thinking is a huge part of, then you could have a higher percentage success rate of having this idea of free will.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. You could also look at it as you're giving more power and control to the more rational, calculating part of your brain,
right?
The less impulsive, emotional part of your brain.
Which, if anything, is free will. It's coming from your
right. If there is free will, that's where it's coming from.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if I stop, I work for a company that you own. If I stop working, and I'm like, Steve, I just can't help myself. What are you going to do?
So that's the ultimate question. So, and then often when we have these discussions, because they're interesting, philosophically, neurologically,
but it doesn't work in the human world.
A lot of people say, okay, but so what?
Yeah,
but what does it matter?
We still have to have laws. We still have to have checks and balances and standards and everything.
Are we being hyper reductionist?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're talking about, you did that. I could argue that you did that because of the electrons bouncing around between these molecules. Who cares? That doesn't really tell us anything about the J level. There's sort of the J level, there's the neurological level, there's the neuronal level, the biological level, there's the physics level. Does the physics level really tell us about how J functions?
Yeah.
I mean, is it really meaningful? That's what we call hyper-reductionist. When I'm trying to understand a phenomenon at one level by examining it at a more fundamental
it doesn't
level.
work there.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Right? It may sometimes, like knowing that you have a brain tumor, does explain your behavior. Well, trying to explain it psychologically may fail because it's really due to the fact that there's something going on biologically with your brain, right? Like if you were drunk and I was trying to explain that psychologically, that would fail because you're drunk, and it's a biological effect on your brain cells that explains your drunken behavior.
Right.
But what do we gain when we go that deeper level and start saying that? Well, that's because of the way the electrical potential across the membrane on this neuron cause the other neuron to fire. Like
you lose 99% of the population when you start talking.
But the thing is, but what does it even mean though? Like, does that really even inform an understanding of how you're functioning at the psychological, neurological level? I think that's where the idea of who cares comes from. It's like, is it hyper reductionist? But this is where I think it is helpful. For one, from a practical point of view, like how do I accomplish my goals? Well, you got to do it by making it as easy for yourself as possible.
Yeah.
If your plan is willpower, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
If your plan is I'm going to make it the pathway of least resistance, all the decades of research shows that's the success successful pathway.
That's great to know.
But also there's ethical implications, right? And this is where we get back to the legal ramifications. If somebody, somebody's behavior was mitigated by a lot of external factors, a lot of things beyond their control, does that mitigate their guilt?
Yeah.
Does that mitigate the punishment? I would think yes, right? But also,
but it can't though, because we live in a society like,
but there's a big, huge but there. But that doesn't mean no consequences, right? It just means that, like mercy is qualifying justice to some extent, and we're being understanding and humanistic and, there, but for the vagaries of fate go I sort of thing, right? Whereas like the marshmallow test, it's like that kid just inherently can't control his behavior.
Right.
It's like, or he's socioeconomically impoverished.
Yeah.
Right. So the understanding that, if like we're, successful, healthy, reasonable people, that's as much luck as anything else. Like we're all benefiting from the cosmic roll of the dice.
It makes me more empathic.
It makes you more empathic,
without a doubt,
more merciful, more humanistic.
I mean, when you look at like a drug addict, and they are addicted to a drug, and like
do they have free will?
You really can see that they don't have the control. Like how mad can you get at them once you're in that compromised position? And I guess a big point here is try not to get yourself in compromised positions.
Right, but of course there's a slippery slope where people don't realize that they're heading that way. That's I think that compromises their free will, of course. But then again, to get back to the original question, there is, don't we still need laws and consequences? It's like yes, because that's part of the algorithm, right? If the fact that like if you cheat, there's consequences to cheating, and you could be punished for it, gets calculated into your decision whether or not to cheat.
Right.
So it's part of the calculation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it should be free of like judgment, right? It should be more about, well, in order for society to function, there needs to be consequences for your actions, like negative consequences when you do things that are antisocial and are bad, right? And there should be rewards when you do things that are productive and make society function better. And it has to operate in a reasonable way. And that also takes into account our evolution, right? We have a sense of justice, not because it's objectively correct, but because we evolved the sense of justice. Why did we evolve a sense of justice?
Yeah.
Because it serves some kind of evolutionary importance. We need it.
Yeah.
So, and it's the same thing. Now we have a criminal justice system is kind of
an extension of that.
An extension of that, yeah. It's sort of we're sort of, rather than just relying upon our gut instincts about what feels right, we're going to have a more thoughtful system that still is based upon our evolved sense of what's right and what's wrong, but in a more thoughtful and nuanced way that we can actually base a society on.
I think social media is an interesting thing to throw in this mix too, because it's a powerful like the idea of like you could be psychologically manipulated, right? So we have these
computer algorithms can psychologically manipulate you into changing your behavior.
Absolutely, and we're seeing it play out, and it's legitimate and it's a problem.
Slot machines are calibrated to affect people's behavior.
Without a doubt.
They pay off exactly as often as they should to maximally reinforce the behavior.
And the food in the United States, a lot of the food that we eat is engineered to make you crave it.
Marketing. All of marketing is about manipulating your behavior.
That's right.
Right. They're not just giving you information. They're manipulating you at a psychological level.
Of course they are. Yeah.
Right.
Got to have that skin, Steve.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All right. Thank you for that. I will endeavor to use my executive function more, and I will use social pressure to help me obtain the goals that I put in front of me.
There's an actual term for that. It's called social norming.
Yeah.
Right. Where you don't tell somebody you shouldn't drink because it's bad for you. You tell them, your friends aren't drinking. Most of your friends aren't drinking.
There it is.
And it's more successful. It's more successful than giving people information. The scared straight thing doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Or you could use, it's called motivational interviewing. This is great. So you want to get healthy, don't you, Jay?
Of course I do.
Yeah. So if that interaction right there, it's like, well, if you want to get healthy, you should stop. You don't smoke, but you should stop smoking. Rather than just saying smoking will give you lung cancer.
It works better the other way.
Do you want to be healthy? Do you want to get lung cancer?
I mean, you literally sound like a motivational speaker opening up a talk.
Yeah.
You know, who here wants to blah blah blah?
Yeah, that's
right?
what it's about. It's
Yeah.
motivational interviewing, if we're in the context of like a medical interview, but it's motivational speaking is you are leveraging people's psychology. You get them to say things because we also have a desire not to be inconsistent, right? So if I say, yes, I want this, they say, okay, well, you want to buy it? Well, no, I don't want to buy it. Then I feel like, oh, I'm contradicting myself, and we don't want to do that in front of other people, right?
Yeah, like when you in a timeshare gets you into the meeting, right? So a lot of people, I'm sure, have gone through this. They load the gun for like an hour to make it to where you almost you can't say no.
You can't say no, right?
Right?
They're leveraging they're boxing you in psychologically so that you have to do the thing that they want to do.
Yeah.
That's right. It's all manipulation. And of course, that wouldn't work if we had complete unfettered free will,
You're
which
right.
we don't. Which we do.
Son of a bitch.
So I think we resolved nothing, but hopefully you'll be confused at a more nuanced level.
I am more confused now than I was half an hour ago.